Hello my dear church boys and welcome back to St. Robert's Daygame podcast, and in this podcast episode I'm going to talk about Daygame for introverts and in what ways Daygame is different for introverts. And the result of this podcast was very surprising for me when I stopped thinking about this in theory but actually looked at different Daygamers I know and introverts I have coached and actually looked at the real differences in how they learned Daygame. Before we get into the topic, I usually talk about the latest updates, coaching spots, etc. But the only important things worth knowing right now are that number one, all the coaching spots in Europe for this season are sold out, completely booked. But I'm going to USA and I will have 3 to 4 coaching spots there in a few months. I'm going to New York City but can travel to most other cities in US where you want to learn Daygame with me. If you want to find out more, go to the description, click on the link about coaching, fill the form at the bottom of the page, say that you're interested in coaching in the US, and I'll get back to you with all the information, dates, prices, cities, etc. And now let's talk about Daygame for introverts. I'm not only very technical and analytical about Daygame and dating, but also about how I coach people. For example, when I started coaching, I would write down the things that worked really good with students in what I called Daygame coaching guidelines, which was basically a compilation of like small tips and tricks I saw. Something like, what should I tell a student before he's coming? How should I structure the first day, the second day? What works best? How to recognize when a student is going to have a dip in energy or maybe a dip in vibe, and how to make sure it doesn't happen by telling some story that prepares him for the failures or the obstacles that are coming. And it worked really, really good. And recently I was coaching a guy in Sweden who was on a harder end of the spectrum. Of course, I've coached many people and very different, and many guys with very different personalities. But some of them are a bit harder students, and sometimes this happens with introverts. So I have been wanting to think and talk about this topic for a while, so I thought, okay, this is the right moment. This is when I should sit down and think about it and make a podcast episode. How is Daygame different for introverts? And I started writing down the things that are different for introverts. And I came up with this list and I partially wrote the podcast script. And then I was thinking, well, yeah, but are these really the things that are different for introverts? And I thought, why don't I take a little bit different approach to this? And what I did is I wrote down in my notes, a list of introverted guys I've coached, at least guys that I remember. And then I put the guys that now are doing really good in Daygame, or more or less good, they at least have gotten several Daygame lays. I put those names in bold, and then there were a few other guys who are starting to get laid, who are starting to be better and better. And so I had a list where I had separated the guys who are doing good from the guys that aren't doing that great. And what I wanted to do with this list, I wanted to see what are the differences? What were the guys that succeeded doing differently? Maybe there were some different personality traits they had. Maybe there was a different approach to how they viewed coaching or I don't know, anything else. So let's talk about the list that I came up with. The first thing I noticed is the guys who did better were a little bit more structured, or not necessarily were more structured, but they were able to have a more structured approach to learning. So they were able to understand what exactly needs to be improved and then focus on it. So when in coaching, I said them, okay, this is the one thing you should differently the next set, and everything else, nothing else matters. So they were more likely to be able to actually focus on that and implement it. And this also worked with guys that I coached remotely over coaching calls and mentorships. Those were also the guys that were able to take what I gave them after the coaching call. And usually after the coaching call, when I listen to several sets the students send, and I see what are 1 to 3 things. Usually, of course, there are many things that people are doing wrong when they're learning Daygame. Let's say there are like 20 mistakes they're making in those Daygame sets, but I would look at what are 1 to 3 things that if they fix those, then everything else will be better in the Daygame set. So when I gave them these things, they were better at implementing them. They were better at understanding, okay, nothing else matters. And they were like, simply they were better at implementing the right things. So that was number one that I noticed. And second thing is even more important, especially for introverts, because the one thing I noticed about introverts in general, for introverts, the learning curve isn't as steep. It takes a bit more time, a bit more energy to actually become decent at day games. So the second point I realized, on and off definitely doesn't work for introverts. For a lot of them, the first really good results came after long periods of consistent work. So going out consistently, making sure if you're hanging out with other people, making sure you're hanging out with good day gamers, not wasting time with things that aren't approaching or aren't adding any value to the time you spend together. So this was a very important second point for introverts, really staying consistent over a longer period of time. Which brings us to the third point. Third point is very similar to the second one, but it's slightly different. It's the ability to keep going. So even if something bad happens, even if you have a bad streak and nothing happens over 100 sets, so the ability to power through and stay positive, and the ability to kind of keep day gaming even when you don't really see the immediate results. And this also is about consistency over volume. So there's not a lot of point in going out and doing 20 sets on a Monday and then not doing anything else for the rest of the week, or like 25 sets in a Monday and then nothing for the rest of the week, and the next Monday you do 25 again. And technically, yeah, you are doing 25 sets over a week, but it's not really like, it doesn't work like that. 25 is the minimum, and it should be stretched out over the week. So you shouldn't skip more than 1 or 2 days. If you skip 1 day, that's fine. If you skip 2, you're gonna see that AA is starting to come back. Some things you learned, you forget. And then once you skip 3 or more days, if you have serious AA, it's gonna be very hard to get back to going out and doing regular day game sets, and a lot of things you learned will simply go away. The next point was to understand that you can't figure out everything on your own. They didn't have this ego thing where I must figure this out on my own, I guess then I'll be a real day gamer. I did this, I learned all of this on my own, nobody helped me. Introverts that succeeded on my list were the guys who understood that, okay, I do have some challenges when I'm communicating with people, so I should probably get some help. So yes, those were the guys who did a few extra coaching calls, maybe like a few extra after coaching as well, because they understood, okay, I do have some challenges and I need help to fix them. I need to understand what exactly my mistakes are right now when I get stuck. And mostly, yeah, they did these coaching calls when they were stuck and they didn't really know what to do next. So the guys who did that seemed to improve better, seemed to be becoming better day gamers than the guys who did not. And this is very similar to the next point, the mentality of I know better, because when I work with someone, I don't really care about upselling people stuff or selling something they don't need, because I am fairly busy. I have quite a few students, and it's not like I need to be too salesy and to convince anyone to work with me. If they don't want to do that, I really don't care. I care more about helping people as much as I can, and the better value I provide for free, the more people are gonna work with me. So I don't really need to do that. So when I suggest people should do something, maybe I tell people after coaching, okay, listen, you should get, like, let's say 6 coaching calls over a few months after we're done with coaching or something like that. I actually mean it, and I think that it is the best thing for them to do. Or I would tell, listen, you want to focus on these 3 things over the next 1 month, or instead of going, let's say someone is on a trip, someone came from US to a trip to Europe and they're traveling around Europe, and I see they're struggling a little bit. So I will tell them something like, listen, don't go to 3 countries for this month that you're here. Go to 1 country and spend a lot of time in 1 city, preferably in an easier city in some places, like in Poland, maybe in Czech Republic, maybe somewhere else, maybe even Baltics. And I noticed that the guys that did not succeed in Daygame, they always thought they knew better and they're gonna figure out everything on their own. And somehow it didn't seem to work. It usually goes hand in hand with watching too much material or material from too many YouTube channels, because one thing I always preach is find a YouTube channel that you like, find a coach whose advice you like, whose advice works for you. You take something a coach tells you to do for free, maybe in his videos, podcasts, whatever. You try that, and if that improves your day game, and you decide this guy is someone who can help me, then watch his videos and don't watch many other videos on YouTube, because again, there's a bunch of stuff on YouTube that simply doesn't work, but also even if it works, different coaches explain things in different ways, and they have slightly different models maybe. And if you mix and match them, then they don't always mix very well. So you want to find someone whose material you like and stick to that material. And the next thing I noticed that guys that succeeded were doing is they were taking, regardless of whether they were doing like a long, month-long, 2-month-long trip around Europe, or they were living in one city, they were going on trips to easier day game cities. And again, why? Because when you are learning day game, you want those training wheels. You want to train in a place that's gonna be easier. So when you go to an easy day game city, you will get better reactions and you will get more interactions after the initial opener. Let's say you go to a really hard day game city and you just get, I don't know, like out of 10 sets, you get 7 blowouts or like really, really short sets. And then you get to practice your stop for 10 times, but you get to practice your stacking for, let's say, 5 times, and your storytelling for maybe 2 times, and then the rest of the set you get to practice maybe once or twice over 10 sets. Whereas if you go to an easier day game city where you don't get as many blowouts, you practice your stop 10 times, you practice your stacking, let's say 9.5 times, and you get to practice storytelling maybe 6-7 times, and the rest of the set maybe 4 or 5 times, and then you get to go on dates. So you get much more experience with parts in the set that are happening later. So after the opener, after the stacking, after the storytelling, you get to practice all parts of the sets, and you get a lot of reference experiences. And this way you start to understand what works. And now when you're going back to your harder day game city, and let's say you do get a bunch of blowouts and only, let's say, 3 sets out of 10 get past the stack where you get a topic and then you're storytelling and she's investing a little bit. If you were day gaming only in that city, what would happen is, well, you would have very little experience with that parts of sets, and it would take you a lot of time to accumulate that experience. But because they went on easier day game trips to easier cities, what happens is, when they get to those parts of sets, which doesn't happen all the time, as I said, let's say 3 times out of 10, they already know what to do because they've done it in easier cities. Yes, of course, they will have to polish those parts of the sets and improve them to a higher kind of level needed for that city. But I noticed that, yes, going on day game trips or vacations to easier cities really helped the introverts that got better in day game. I also started looking at what's the effect or what's the impact of the lifestyle these introverts live. So I've coached some guys who maybe live just in one city, work their 9-to-5 job, don't do much out of their apart from their work. And I've also coached guys that, even though they're introverted, they've traveled the world, they lived in very different countries in the world. And in the beginning, I thought, okay, yeah, this is an important factor as well. I noticed that some guys that are doing better have had that more adventurous lifestyle, maybe living in Latin America for a year, or just going to Australia and living there for a while, or backpacking around the world when they were like in their 20s. Or I thought that's the case, but then I spoke to one of the students and he said, and even though he wasn't doing that great, he said that he actually has lived in the different parts of the world, in very interesting parts around the world, very impressive, like places that I don't know a lot of people who have been to those places. So I realized that it isn't such a clear-cut factor, and I kind of took this off the list. And I also looked at how successful they are in life, and I found no correlation between how successful they are in life to how they're doing in Daygame. Although you have to understand that people who are getting Daygame coaching in general are doing pretty okay in their lives, so it's kind of like a slippery thing. And now I was pretty happy. I was pretty excited. I had a list of things that, oh my god, if I implemented this list, if I really put my attention to this, and maybe I could help more guys get better at Daygame, regardless. Also introverted guys, and it seemed like I have come up with a list of personal traits and behaviors that helped introverted guys become good at Daygame, but I wanted to compare it to non-introverted guys and how it is different from them. So I just wanted to double check if I look at the extroverted guys I've coached, then how would they be doing, and what would be the differences between the guys that did good and not as good, and how that list would be different from what I had now about the introverted guys. And surprise, surprise, it's not. I realized I've seen more or less just as many extroverted guys who struggled to get good results, just as introverted guys. I realized that this list of aspects that helped introverts to get better at Daygame was the same list that helped extroverts, and the differences between the extroverted guys who made it in Daygame and the ones who didn't were pretty much exactly the same. I was really surprised about it, because I've always thought probably extroverted guys do better because, you know, they're used to talking to people, but no, I know many great Daygamers who are very introverted, and I know many great Daygamers who are extremely extroverted. Yes, for extroverted guys, it does seem that the beginning part of the learning curve is a little bit longer, but other than that, I realized that there aren't many differences. I really honestly did not expect it when I was making the initial script for the podcast about introverts, and I was writing down things that I think introverts should do differently. I'm super glad I decided to double check this by actually looking at real students I've coached and their real results. So if you are an introvert, I have very good news for you. You are just as much likely, more or less, to succeed in Daygame as extroverted students. Of course, you have to understand that the initial learning curve is gonna be harder, but other than that, there aren't many differences. Congratulations! As I said in the beginning of the podcast, I was honestly very surprised about how this turned out when I really started digging about how in reality the Daygame looks for introverts, and I found out that it's mostly the same and they face the same problems as extroverts. But if you want to talk about this topic more and you have some more specific questions, you can ask them in our Daygame Church Telegram group chat, where we have more than 300 guys from all over the world. If you want to join the group chat, just go to my website, saintrobert.blog, join the mailing list, and in the welcome email you will get an invitation link you can use to join the chat. And if you are interested in working with me, learning Daygame with me in the USA, then again, click the link in the description, fill the form there, tell you're interested in the US, and I'll get back to you with all the information, the dates, the cities, the prices, etc. With all of this being said, thank you very much for listening, and see you in the next podcast episode. Ciao!